Thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Welcome to the Procurement Plugs. This is our second webinar of the year. I am Annalicia, and I am your host for today. So today's webinar agenda, everyone, welcome again. Sorry about the little glitch in our technology, bound to happen sometimes. So today's webinar, we will be covering a few elements that would look at boardroom preparation and sort of preparing a mindset shift for enterprise level leadership. We will have some key elements that we will cover today, and the objectives for these are sort of unpacking board level recruitment criteria, understanding the market for procurement, and not just procurement, but executive level recruitment, and understanding the sort of key competencies um, that boards seek when selecting C-suite executives into those roles. Understanding strategic leadership framework. So, um, gain a bit of knowledge around proven methodologies for steering enterprise growth. We'll look at data, which is not always talked about from a sort of senior leadership procurement perspective, but we want to look at data driven culture and discover some practical steps to turn analytics into sort of more strategic insights that inform enterprise level decision making. And then, of course, we'll have some Q&A at the end so we can sort of leverage peer insights. And that would help us to sort of course, probably uh, dig a little bit deeper into the things that we're covering today. So today is really about helping you to understand that first shift from functional growth into enterprise leadership. It's something in procurement that it's not always talked about, and I really wanted to sort of bring this into the procurement plug and sort of like help people to understand it's the difference between being a functional leader. I'm sure all of us sort of probably understand what the difference is for that, but trying to dig into it a little bit deeper with some experts that we have today. So a little bit about myself. So I'm Annalicia. I founded the Procurement Plug, and I've only soft launched it in December. I've been in procurement for about 12 years, predominantly freelancing, consulting, and I've seen many different organizations and many different processes and the way businesses work. And that is pretty much rebirthed the Procurement Plug because in many instances, I think one thing have been really constant is the upskilling, the leadership sort of initiatives within businesses that are kind of even if it's existent, it's not being fully utilized, or even if if it's not there, um, people become very stagnant in their roles. Um, Today we have a few speakers with us. I'd like to introduce three of them. We've got three senior executives on our call today. So we've got David, who is David is a senior procurement and transformation expert with over 30 years of experience leading change around public bodies and FTSE 100 companies. He is a former group CPO at Rolls-Royce, and he's led transformative initiatives and crisis management through COVID-19. David currently advises global organizations, um, and he consults as a digital leader in procurement, ESG, and supply chain resilience. He's also designed and delivers executive MBA and MSc programs across UK universities and academic boards. So David is a recognized leader today. You're in good hands with David, and he'll cover mindset change and a little bit more about enterprise leadership with you. We have got Susan Walsh. Say hello, Susan. I think most people might know Susan from LinkedIn. She's very active on LinkedIn. Susan is your classification guru. She is a leading expert in data cleaning and classification. So if you have dirty data, we have the cleaner here for you. She will get you all up and running. She's the founder of the classification guru and the creator of the COAT methodology, and she's helped 90 plus global clients fix dirty data which is very important for enterprise risk management. She's the author of TEDx. She's an author of two or three amazing books. And she's a TEDx speaker, founder of the Supplier to Samification. So Susan is a trusted voice in data excellence and transformation, and she will take us through enterprise sort of management, data cleansing, and driving clean data as a culture. Um, within uh, managing, especially from a procurement point of view. I think it's not mentioned a lot. So Susan would help us to go through that with us today. Um, I love the code methodology as well, which you will go through with you. It will help you to understand a very sort of memorable, simple way in how to sort of manage your data, how to keep it clean, and how to sort of align that with your pretty much build it into your general processes as well. Today as well, we have Craig Elvin. Craig is a seasoned executive professional with over 20 years of experience placing senior talent across the UK, Europe, and the Middle East and Africa. A former military engineer, Craig also brings a disciplined and strategic approach to recruitment. Thank you. He's got a strong focus on procurement and supply chain operations and leadership roles. He works very closely with CEOs, founders, and executive teams so to help build out their leadership capability, particularly with fast-growing and transformation-focused organizations. So Craig is a passionate veteran advocate as well, serving as heads resource group sponsor for armed forces covenant supporting veterans' career transitions. Absolutely amazing. So, Craig will take us through today executive searches and what the board looks like and what they tend to recruit for and the capabilities, the mindset change that people tend to, that the board tends to look for in individuals and professionals. Again, it's not something, I'm not sure how many people are in um, any types of groups that support these sort of conversations or sort of mindset change as well. But it's very important um, to understand if you're trying to move over into board level roles, what sort of uh, behaviors are sort of looked for when going into the recruitment side of things. A little bit about the procurement plug. The procurement plug, I developed the procurement plug, as I mentioned earlier, on the back of my consultation experience as a procurement professional. I've worked in different organizations, and there's many ways I saw that there are excuse me, a gap for development. So the procurement plug is built, it's a strategic ecosystem for procurement growth, leadership and innovation. It's purpose built essentially for procurement as a career to build elevate procurement as a high impact career and future facing business function. We all know the topics about procurement just being cost saving, so I've built it as an ecosystem to move past that. Within the procurement plug, we have the academy, and that is providing a lot of accredited courses, SIPS design training. It also provides courses in ESG, leadership, project and change management, risk, all the things that makes procurement great. It's for individuals to look at their upskilling, but it's also for corporate cohort type training as well. We've got the Personal Development Hub in the Procurement Plug. Also, it's an individual subscription base or enterprise subscription. It features structured career tools, professional coaching, self-directed learning journeys, and everything that an individual or a team needs to grow in their careers and personally as well. It also have productivity and well-being tools within the Personal Development Hub. We've got executive coaching and mentorship as well. So you can connect with expert coaches in procurement, in transformation, in law, ESG, leadership, and many more. So there is coaching, there's mentorship, and we've also got consultation. All these things um, you can probably find bits of these scattered over the internet here, there. But the procurement plug, we're looking to sort of bring everything under one roof and provide a a one-stop solution, but it's not just providing these services, it's providing a bit more around intelligence and how you can grow, the things you can grow. So we're not just saying how you can grow, but it's also providing you the right tools, the direction of how you can grow individually and for teams. We've also got the Business Hub as well. The Business Hub, it provides solutions. So you have procure tech solutions in there, consultancy, ESG, consultancy, change management consultancy, all the sort of things that you would need in terms of solutions as well for your business, for your function to thrive. We've also got the VIP Business Lounge, which features a thought leadership and collaboration zone. So as a senior leader in procurement, you are able to provide your thought leadership visible to the community that we're providing in order to help build your personal brand as well, or even as a business also. Um, we've also got which I will discuss a little bit more in the end. We've got the concierge, which is on-demand procurement office where you will have the ability to onboard the procurement plug concierge as um, your second hand essentially, and be able to draw down on tasks from a credit-based system. So the ecosystem is very much aligned to supporting individual growth and providing solution support to organizations and business functions. So, without further ado, let's get on to the real meat of the day, which is all around executive leadership mindset change. So, I will introduce, as I introduced earlier, David. David will take you through the next few slides, which he will introduce himself a little bit more and talk you through mindset change and also preparing for enterprise leadership. Off you go, David.
Thank you. Well, hopefully you can see the slides, everybody.
Yes, thank you.
So good, excellent. So what I'd like to try and cover today is a number of things, which is really about sort of understanding those board level priorities, and particularly how procurement then drives that enterprise value. Looking at then functional leadership to what I call enterprise leadership. So in other words, the transition effectively from a functional area into a more strategic, more sort of forward-looking approach that is certainly very typical of the C-suite. One of the other things is I'll signpost a section that Annalicia is going to lead on pathways to executive leadership and the exec plug. And then one thing that has always sort of, and it's probably due to my sort of, I guess, research and years of experience in the behavioural space, but looking at competency versus character. So this is thinking about the sort of what I call, in lay terms, the hard skills down through into soft skills, and then therefore balancing that experience and adaptability that you'll certainly need at a more senior level. And then developing what we call that executive mindset. In other words, adapting to the leadership challenges at the highest level. So without further ado, understanding those board level priorities, really important in terms of then how we do that, and thinking about how procurement can then drive that enterprise value. And there's a phrase that I've often used, which is called make sense and translate. In other words, your job as a senior leader is to understand the different things that will come from different parts of the business. In other words, thinking about the things that marketing might talk about, finance might talk about, IT might talk about, and what is the consequence? What is the significance of those discussions from an organizational perspective? And therefore have that ability then to set the vision, also make the interpretation in a sense for your team, and then create a set of metrics that are very high level and impactful. And always within that, ensuring that we can provide the clarity and the simplicity for our teams. One of the things that we absolutely cannot do in a leadership position is simply cascade down directly a verbatim set of I'll call it of sort of discussions and information that simply comes down from the C-suite. That will not be sufficient. Your job as a senior leader is to make sense of all that and translate that then into an action-orientated plan that can then be utilized by the procurement team. And vice versa, then translating that then back up into the C-suite to connect with the way in which they understand and interpret the vision and the mission of the organization. So that way, then you then effectively become the interpreter. Think of it as people that speak in different languages, but actually there's an interpreter in the middle of that. Somebody who's able to speak both those languages and can then translate between the two different communities effectively, efficiently, and with ease and clarity and simplicity. The recognition for me, in a sense, has always been that that lexicon of the C-suite is not the same as being in a functional position. And so your job, in a sense, is to almost operate effectively within two different environments. So consider it that you're operating in this sort of very strategic and a very different environment, along with the different demands that will come from that. There'll be different discussions about EBITDA, about sort of winning business, about marketing campaigns, all sorts of things. And your job, in a sense, is to understand all of that and what's the significance, or not, as the case may be, for your procurement teams and your associated functions. Be that as it then reaches into the way in which you then might think about not just currently structuring your data, as Susan will no doubt talk about, but also talking about the future requirements of your data, how you will set that up, how you will integrate it, how you will create the right architecture to enable that to happen so that it doesn't become a big, how can I put it, clunky transition at some future date. Your job is to smooth that way through the gears of transition so that it doesn't feel disruptive and clunky. Your job is to make that journey as smooth as possible. And that means ensuring that you can actually clarify what constitutes value for each and every part of the organization. And the recognition, of course, is that that will be unique to every single organization, unique to every single functional area of the business, as well as external investors. So the ability to be able to work through all those different communities is incredibly important, and making sure that it's consistent with the messages and the approach of the business. So making sure you're almost become a bit of a chameleon effectively. You're working across and through all those different communities, but at the same time, making it look very effortless and making it look very authentic. Hugely, hugely important. Communicating with effectiveness and consistency, hugely important. The one thing that most people will pick out is the minute that something that sticks out and looks to be different to what somebody is expecting. So then managing those expectations is really, really important. One of the other things to learn as well is, whilst we might be very passionate and enthusiastic people about procurement, the ability to what I call actively listen versus speaking is essential. Knowing when to come into a conversation and when knowing not to come into a conversation is just as important. You may have an important piece of information or an important perspective or whatever it happens to be, but if it doesn't fit the mood and the context of the conversation, don't do it. So resist the temptation to disrupt that flow of conversation. So some of these nuances and how can I put it? I'll call it the way in which you work as a chameleon within those communities is part and parcel of the success factors that we see within different areas. Right. So that shift from functional leadership to enterprise leadership, in other words, the CPO to CEO journey. One of the things that I often think about is and it's based upon a lot of obviously research as well as my own personal experience, is that you effectively move from being an expert in what you're doing to coaching others to do the same and supporting them in how they do it, making sure that they ask the right questions, make sure that they understand the responses that they get back, and obviously then thinking about the different ways in which people recognize, consume information, communication, and all the different ways in which they will then connect with that whole dialogue and interpretation of what's happening within the business. Some people will be very visual, some people will be very number driven, some people will be very fixated on the preciseness of the text or whatever it happens to be that they're reading. These are important factors, and these are important factors in the way in which somebody will then go, ah, yes, I get it, I understand it. But then goes back to what I was saying earlier about the make sense and translate. You're helping people to coach them through the different styles and approaches that will occur within a business. So also moving from that, what I call that execution, to driving impact through others. It is not you that's delivering the project or the program or whatever it happens to be. It's about being able to motivate and get others to deliver that impact as part of a collective, part of the team in a cohesive and consistent way. Hugely, hugely important. Also, that evolution from what I call oversight to a clear set of principles and directives. The last thing that people want is to be micromanaged. So what you have to do is to make sure that you give them the space, the boundaries, the principles, effectively, if you like, in a sense, the guide to say, if it's within these parameters, go do it, go make it happen. But observe these certain things, understand these certain things, and if there's anything that's outside of that, come back and we'll have a discussion. So making sure that you're always there to support, but you're not there to control. Very, very different, how can I put it? Very different sort of approach and tone and way in which you do that. Stepping back and empowering others takes a lot of, how can I put it? A lot of nerve and skill, because if you're a passionate procurement person that's being very used to being hands-on, directing things, controlling things, guess what? That's going to come really hard when you have to say, no, I've got to let go. I've got to let the other person do that, but I've got to be able to observe, support, coach, mentor, all those kind of things to make sure that somebody else can deliver. So empowering others takes a lot of skill and experience. It's a bit like moving from a technical discipline to a strategic discipline. Very, very different roles, really, in a way, but you're understanding the context of the subject. Also, in this space, prioritizing behaviors over technical skills. It's okay, believe it or not to have the technical skills that maybe a Susan has in the data space, but actually it's the classic, but I need to know somebody who I can trust, who does have those skills and can deliver, and give them the space, the boundary, and the principles, and all the other things and the support to deliver that stuff. So it's about, again, it's about those behaviors, about motivating somebody to want to do that for and on behalf of you and the team and the organization as a whole. The one thing that I also recognized in my career is invest in your own learning. And it's a great tribute to the fact that we've got many people on this webinar. But the important thing is investing in your own learning is hugely important. I've met many people in my career who said, oh, yes, I passed my SIPs 30 years ago. So what CPD have you done? Oh, I didn't need to do any. I passed my exam. That is the fastest way of going backwards in a changing world, by standing still. So the important thing is to make sure that you continue to invest in your own learning, even in areas where you say, well, I don't want to be an expert in that. Yes, but you need to know and understand what is happening in that space, and what are the key factors, what are the key risks, what are the key attributes, what are the key opportunities. You still need to understand that, and mastering that art of proportionality at all times, because over-indexing on something at the risk of starving something else is not the right thing to do as a leader. So at this point, I'm going to point to Annalicia, who will pick up later on in this session, because some of the things that we've touched upon already will be picked up in the executive leadership, exec plug plans for future development, for future opportunities for people to get involved with. So, competency versus character. Balancing that experience with the whole adaptability. And the one thing that we've learned of recent times is that, guess what? The one sure thing is that no 2 days are going to be exactly the same. The ability to recognize that actually we are now in a position whereby an essential attribute is thriving on ambiguity, thriving on the ability to be agile, to be flexible. Those organizations that effectively are rigid, they become the brittle organizations. In other words, they will become broken. Why? Because they can't be agile and flexible. The same is true in terms of you as an individual. Whilst you might have put a lot of effort into something, guess what? If the wind blows in a different direction, you've got to sail it down through a different sea, then you need to go there. Doesn't matter if you've plotted the route through another sea somewhere else, that doesn't count. You've got to be prepared to let go and shift with the new direction. Hugely, hugely important. There's no point hanging on to a good plan if the good plan doesn't fit the direction that you're going in. So important that you can have that ability to recognize that you've just got to put that down and go with a new direction. Hugely important, very frustrating, and it's a hard characteristic to develop because guess what? We all take it very personal that we've developed this wonderful plan, but guess what? We're not going to go there. It's a great plan, but we're not going to go there. We have to go somewhere else because that is a consequence of the external factors and issues. Resiliency and that sort of sense of calm and confidence. One of the things that was certainly very, very important when COVID hit and Rolls-Royce was really, really being tested, and particularly when you recognise that in the direct context of Rolls-Royce, they have a power by the hour model. In other words, for every hour that an engine flies, Rolls-Royce got paid. Guess what? In the first 3 months of COVID, flying hours were down by 80%. So suddenly your revenue has dropped by 80%. That is not a time to go running around screaming, saying it's really, really bad, it's terrible, it's awful. That's the time that you then need to give out that and exhibit that sense of calm and confidence because that's what your teams need. Integrative thinking, sort of the 3D of thinking, if you like, in a sense. Nothing is two-dimensional because we're in such a more complex environment. It's so important that we consider the things that may come from the diversity of thinking, the diversity of groups that bring different thoughts to the table. Hugely, hugely important, and we should embrace that. But also being self-aware. In other words, you can't be the master of everything. So recognize that there are some weaknesses that you will have, no matter how experienced you are. Recognize those and be prepared to seek help from others in an authentic and genuine way. So that for me, in a sense, is really how I would see that sort of difference between competency and character. These are not technical skills. These are all behavioral skills. And then finally, adapting to those challenges at the leadership level. And the recognition, believe it or not, that a wrong decision is better than no decision. That sounds quite contrary, but actually that's the truth. People will not just sit there and go, I can't sit here any longer knowing that my leader has not made a decision. That is not what you're expected to do, and neither is not what you should do. Knowing when a decision is needed or not, because sometimes a decision is not needed. Recognize when that is the case. Consult, listen, engage, and act. Most important. And the final one, I'll just leave you with a wonderful sort of technical term from the world of behavioral science, which is don't succumb to the Dunning-Kruger effect. Now, what that means is don't think you have more capability and capacity and experience than you actually do have, because the risk with that is you make a very important decision based with insufficient knowledge, experience, and capability. You will make a very poor decision, and it could be quite a critical one. So don't succumb to that. Recognize when you need to put your hand up and say, you know what, I need some help on this. I need some support on this. Very, very important. So That's the final technique. That's my technical term for the day. That's the one you need to take away today. Don't succumb to the Dunning-Kruger effect. That's the final one. At that point, I'm going to hand over to my colleagues.
Thank you so much, David. Amazing, amazing. Um, yeah, I'm sitting and I'm learning, of course, because I'm not a CEO yet. So, well, I am in my own world, but I've not been crossed over to that for in a corporate world. So thanks for that. So now we're gonna talk all about clean data, merging all the things that David said, and we have the classification guru, Susan Walsh, to go through that with us today. Over to you, Susan.
Thanks very much. Hopefully you can see my screen okay.
Yes, all good.
Fabulous. Thanks, David. Yeah, data is pretty much the foundation of a business now. And while you absolutely don't need to be technical and know everything, you do need to be aware. So I'm going to give you some tips today on what to look out for, be aware of, and how you can just very quickly interrogate some of that data if you need to. So first up, we're going to talk about a little bit about my background. What is dirty data? What is the cost of that dirty data? How can you build a data-driven culture? A little bit of tips on just a quick spot check of your data, and then we'll summarize at the end there. So firstly, I have a very varied background. So I didn't start out in data at all. I really did fall into it by accident. And I actually graduated with a degree in commerce in 2001 and had a very different hair colour back then. In my 20s, I worked in sales. I even was on QVC selling bras for a little while. And then I decided that wasn't for me, so I wanted to set up my own business, which was a lovely, beautiful clothes shop in Guildford. Unfortunately, nobody came in and bought anything, and I ended up being so bankrupt, so broke, I couldn't afford to go bankrupt. So I needed a job quickly, and I found an ad online to go and work for a spend analytics company, and that's really where I found my love for data and why I can kind of see the whole perspective of things because I've worked on both sides of the business. But the executive cost of dirty data is, and what is dirty, why do they not match? That's not right. But anyway, it's really worthwhile being aware of the kind of types of data that might cause you problems within your organization and not necessarily just within procurement, because if you do move up to the boardroom, you need to be aware of everything that's going on. And the first thing is everybody has typos in their data, multiple versions of the same thing, all spelled slightly differently. You could have wrong or ambiguous descriptions, and then how do you know what is a service? Is it cleaning? Is it legal? How do you know? You need to be really clear so that when you're making decisions, you're making decisions on the right information. Things like missing code, it means you can't report on information correctly, like your sales, your cost of goods, your profitability. So it's really important to have all the right information and nothing missing. And very much like that, information in the wrong columns too. We see this a lot with address data where you have the city in the postcode column or vice versa. This could impact when you're sending out, it could even be like official letters to your shareholders, your customers, and it's not going to the right place. So it's in terms of marketing too, if you're targeting the wrong customers or even have the wrong information, then you're looking at breaches. Things, if you're working in a global organization, sometimes there are no standard units of measure. Are we talking in kilometers or miles, inches or meters? All those things matter because you might not be getting the full picture of what's going on in your organization. You might only be looking at part of it. And then what about currency? Is everyone doing their currency conversions correctly? Are you actually looking at those right sales numbers or profitability numbers or purchasing unit price? You know, is it correct? Do you know what currency you're working in? Because I've seen data sets where we've assumed it's all in USD. And then when there's been a huge variance in unit price, you can tell that something's gone wrong with the currency conversion. And then there's also kinds of things like formatting information too. So if we have different dates, for example, you might have day, day, month, month, year, year. But if you're in the US, it might be month, month, day, day, year, year. And actually, how do you format that? Is it dashes, slashes, dots in between those dates? Because what happens is you get multiple formats for the same date. You can't match documents. You can't find what you're looking for because the date's in a different format. That can hold things up. It can even cause problems with contracts if things don't match. So it's really important to have that standardization throughout your organization. And then, of course, all those things create our good old friend, the duplicates. And what do duplicates mean? Well, it doesn't mean just more than one version of the same thing. That means a cost to your organization in terms of how long it takes to do something, how long it takes to find something, how the cost of storing all this information on your servers or your CRM system. It all costs money or time, which ultimately is money. And it could slow down your decision-making process. It could slow down your legal process. It can affect all kinds of different things. But let's have a look at how that could actually impact your organization, specifically procurement data. If you have something miscategorized, then you're reporting on the wrong information. Somebody here thought LinkedIn was a restaurant because of the description. Sometimes we assume we know what something is when it's not. Here's Tinder Corporation. We would assume that that is an online dating platform, but no, actually, this is an IT services company here in the UK that does IT work. So you have to be really careful that everybody's paying attention to their data. But then it also affects things like payment terms or addresses. You know, here we have abbreviated and non-abbreviated addresses for the same supplier. It costs and causes lots of different records for the same thing. How do you know which records to assign that PO to? Is your invoice being paid twice because it's going on to two different accounts and nobody's realized? And it might sound like a bit of a silly thing to say, but it happens, and fraud as well. So lots of different reasons that you might have like information that might need to be cleaned within your organization. And then what about payment terms? We often see that a number of suppliers have different payment terms on different accounts again. So how is that impacting your cash flow as a business? You know, are you paying earlier than you should be, or is it affecting the relationship with the organization, your customer? Because sometimes they're getting paid in net 45 and sometimes it's 30, sometimes it's 60. Who knows? And again, back to this multiple versions of the same supplier. This is an example of some data we cleaned for a client. We defined a golden record for each customer to make sure that they had the same one single source of information for all of their supplier data. Because look at the messy way that the addresses were before they were formatted, and then suddenly before it doesn't really look like there's the same version of lots of the accounts, but afterwards it clearly does. And then once we've done that, we can then categorize it correctly, and then you get real visibility on what's going on in your organization. Products too. This is some cleaning that we did. There was multiple different versions of the same product. The colored blocks are all the same item. So all these different versions, that has impact on your business, like SKU counts. Sometimes you are targeted on SKU counts if you're in supply chain. What about warehousing costs? Because you actually could be storing the same product 3 times in 3 different locations. You have way more inventory than you need, and you don't even realize. So all these kinds of things that are going to impact your business, your organization, and as a board member, your ability to affect profitability, bottom line margin, etc. So being aware of that is really good. But why should you bother? Well, of course, it's going to save time, but as well as that, it's going to be costly to rectify. Much easier to clean it up front and have it ready than try and fix it post whatever, whether that's implementation. It could affect your decision-making process. It's going to impact all areas of your business, including fraud and risk management, because if you can't see what's going on, there could be really real nasties hiding in your data. Regulatory issues, privacy issues. I mean, we don't often think about this, but what about the reputational damage of your organization? It could impact that too. And then, of course, ultimately, they're all negative things. But what about spinning it in a bit of a more positive light? Guess what? Having clean, accurate, usable data can help increase your profitability and improve that bottom line. So what is this cost of the dirty data? Well, it's going to impact your cost savings. You know that. You guys are in procurement. Well, and those supplier negotiations too. Are you getting the right information, or are you working with a slightly kind of one arm tied behind your back? Just by normalizing your suppliers, you could rationalize them because you normally have multiple versions of the same thing in your system. If you're in sales and marketing, it's about targeting those right customers. Are you putting budget towards the right people and with the right message? Because otherwise it's just wasted. And then what about shipping those correct products? Does it have the right codes? Does it have the right description? Is it labeled correctly? Is it in the right place in the warehouse? All those things. But we also heard, people absorb information in different ways. Some people are numbers, some people like to hear things, some people like to see things. And visually, having unclean data can really impact that too. So here's a list of some unnormalized suppliers, things that we would see regularly in one of our data sets. When we normalize it, this picture suddenly changes a lot. Look at that. There's only 4 suppliers and the values change. That making decisions based on that second image is going to be way different to that first image, because of course you're going to be looking at hundreds, if not thousands of rows of data. You're not going to easily spot that there's multiple versions of the same thing. So it's going to have that impact on, if you might think, oh, it's just in the spreadsheet, but it's when you're reporting back to the board and whoever, it's going to have an impact on that too, and what they see and the decisions they make. And here's another example of misclassified data. All this information at the top, all these misclassified data were all legal services. What kind of impact and decision making is that having? How many different suppliers do you actually have for legal services? And then everyone's talking about the magic word AI and tech. And guess what? Data cleaning is often neglected. If there's one thing you can do at board level to influence your organization, I would say invest in some clean data. Put some money aside, get the budget to do that, because it will improve your credibility within the organization and the organization's performance massively. Nobody ever notices these things until the post-implementation of the tech, and by then it's very costly. Staff lose faith in the data. They don't want to use the tool or what it's working. Going to cost you some money to fix. If you do fix it, are people going to use this tool again? Because if not, that project's going to be abandoned. And it's true that tens of millions of dollars of projects are abandoned because they didn't get the data right in the first place. You can be that hero at the board level, championing data quality to make the best decisions. And of course, everyone wants to know if AI is going to take over their job. Well, I tell you this, as long as it can't tell the difference between a dog and a mop, an apple or an owl, or a dog or a bagel, I think we're all safe. And obviously that's tongue in cheek, but jokes aside, there are always going to be a need for a mixture of humans and tech. It's not one or the other. It's always going to need to be both. And then building that data-driven culture, well, that's just as important too. So we need to think about governance, and it's a bit of a dirty word, a bit intimidating. So this is just a quick, friendly way of explaining what governance is in a way that everybody in the organization can understand. It's basically drawing in the lines and making sure, if you've got things, squiggly lines, you're going to miss gaps. So make sure your data has its coat on, make sure it's consistent, it's organized, it's accurate, and it's trustworthy. And you have to realize that there is no quick fix. There is no magic button or software in the world that's going to magically solve these problems. You have to put the effort in. You need people to look at your data, not necessarily you, but it is the whole organization's responsibility to make sure that that is correct. And agree those common standards, terms, processes, maintain, refresh that data and spot check it too, because it's not going to stay clean forever. So, and that's where the data code framework comes in. It's a framework to help minimize errors, to help with that governance, to engage everybody, and it's memorable and fun. And if people remember it, they're more likely to adhere to it. So very quickly, consistent, everyone's using the same language, terminology, units of measure, date formats. Organize it, categorize it, make sure it's accurate. And then once you have all those things, you have, guess what, trustworthy data. You can make the best decisions for your organization. Think of it like this. Data is like a classic car. If you don't look after it, it's not going to be valuable or usable anymore. It's going to rust, and then you're not going to get anything for it. You have to nurture and look after it. So very quickly, if you do just want to know some top level stuff about what's going in your data, and not just don't always just trust what people are bringing to you. Challenge that information too. Do a bit of research yourself if you can. Be aware of those things. All you need to do is get a quick pivot table, some normalized suppliers and some classification, put it in a tabular form and look at this. Take away the subtotals, and then suddenly you can start to see like suppliers and categories. And if you've come from procurement, you'll know roughly what suppliers should be in what categories. Anything that stands out is going to pop out on that pivot table for you. It really is as simple as that. And it could be, you could do it with values, numbers, units. And it just helps you interrogate the data that people are bringing to you too. Don't just accept that they know it's right. Do a bit of questioning with that too. So that is very quickly everything we have gone over. Data is going to drive your success. If you have your fingers on the pulse and understand the importance of data quality, then you are going to be ahead of the game. And there are no shortcuts. You have to put the work in, but the data really is the window to your business. It tells you so much about what's going on. Know and maintain it, and then you'll see what's going on. Agree there's common standards, get everybody involved, and remember to make sure that that data has coat on. And of course, it's always a bit of a dry subject. So here's something really quick to just give you a little bit of an insight into how data can be fun. Hi, I'm Susan Walsh, and companies across the globe are at it. They're replacing their third-party spend classification tools with the Classification Guru, a specialist in spend data classification, taxonomy customization, and data cleansing. Dirty data, nasty typos, stubborn duplicates. The Classification Guru does it all. Don't waste your time on multiple data cleaning products. You only need one. The Classification Guru. Bam, and the data is clean. And that is my time up. Thank you so much for your time. It'd be great to connect on LinkedIn. Here's my QR code, but I have taken up enough of your time. It's time for me to pass the baton on. So thank you so much for your time.
Amazing. Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you so much for that, Susan. Really, really important stuff there. All about clean data and how it affects the bottom line. I think we in procurement always want to think about bottom line, but how do we do that? The steps to do that. We need to know everything, how to do that, and clean data is
Well, it can get
absolutely
you
one of those.
promoted too. If you know everything that's going on, the data will tell you. And if you can demonstrate that you know what's going on in the organization, then that is going to help elevate you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Now we're going to wrap all of those up, the competencies, the data cleansing, and we want to talk about the executive recruitment industry and how all these competencies and how it's looked at, understanding that from Craig Elvin today. So Craig, over to you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I'll unmute myself. There we go. That'll help. Are you able to? Can you see my screen?
Yeah, all good.
Fantastic. Look, thanks for having me on, Alicia. Much appreciated. I don't have my own advert, which is something I feel like I might need to have a look into, Susan. So I would like to talk to you about what is going on in the world of executive recruitment. Those of you that are aspiring to move perhaps from senior management level into board level and even C-suite as part of your career. So I thought I'd give you some insights. And what was really interesting for me, there was a lot of synergies between what we're seeing and the advice that David was given as well. So happy to share this information with you. So those of you who don't know me, my name's Craig Elvin. I'm one of the board members at Heads Resourcing Group, and I run our executive search arm, Executive Heads. Many of you in the world of procurement will be aware of our Procurement Heads brand that focuses specifically on procurement recruitment, but ours is slightly broader than that and sort of sits in that C-suite and C-suite -1 level. Like Susan, I didn't choose my career. After 10 years in the British Army as an electrical mechanical engineer, I fell into the world of recruitment. Since then, I've got 20 plus years experience, and the last 10 I've been running executive search practices or businesses, and lots of those have been associated with procurement and supply chain leadership, both in the UK and internationally. And typically I work with SME, mid-cap organisations who are looking to scale and grow, are on a growth journey, and a lot of those will have an event at the end of it. So I can attest to Susan's requirement for clean data, because when those businesses get to that point and they're going through due diligence with companies, when these sorts of problems, these sorts of issues start to be highlighted early on, it's a real warning sign for private equity investors or anybody looking to make a trade sale, that sort of thing. So yeah, clean data is really, really important. What are we seeing then that boards are really looking at the moment? What is driving them to hire people in terms of what are they truly looking for their individuals? And the first thing, as David said, is leadership vision. And if we break that down probably a little bit further, typically those boards very generically have got three aims. It's increased revenue, it's increased profitability, and the third one that a lot of people don't talk about is that coaching, mentoring, developing, building teams, because they're the three main focuses of boards. It might be marketing, it might be procurement and supply chain, it might be finance, but they're all derivatives and geared towards those three aims. So, as David said, people have to be able to align their function with those aims and make that leap from functional level to those sort of broader aims. One of the things that we've seen a huge increase on, certainly post-pandemic, is emotional intelligence within leadership roles. Certainly when we look at the workforce today, you've got everybody from baby boomers, Gen X, through to Gen X, millennials, or iGen as they're often called, even into Gen Z. And what we will start to see in the next couple of years, believe it or not, is Generation Alpha starting to join our workforce. All of those people have a huge difference in terms of what they want, what they need, what they're looking for in their careers. And as a leader, you have to be able to pull that together and turn that into an efficient and effective operation, taking all of their needs and requirements into account. So emotional intelligence is definitely up there in terms of expectations. Strategic thinking, it's a lot of this comes from the pace of change, right? The pace of change and that evolutionary pace of change is, I think the statistic is it's doubling. What was doubling over 10 years is now doubling over a matter of months and weeks in some instances. So those people that sit on the boards of companies have to have one hand in the day-to-day operation, but they also need this ability to be able to sit long-term and look at strategic thinking and how that is gonna affect the business. Rightly or wrongly, we need leaders now that can undertake crisis management. I think we've had double the amount of what they call black swan events in the last 10 years than we had in the previous 20. And if you go far back as the financial crash in 2008, then we've had Brexit, the COVID pandemic, the Suez Canal crisis, the Ukraine war in the last 10 years at least. So people have to be able to manage, and going back to David's point, we might set out on a journey to go from A to B, but actually something happens over here that means we now need to go A, D, C, Q to get to B. So you've got to be able to develop your capability to kind of manage during really extenuating circumstances. And the other thing that we've seen is behavioural and cultural alignment, really important for boards at the moment. Do these individuals, either whether it's somebody internally looking to make that move, or whether it's somebody externally coming into the organisation, do they have that behavioural and cultural alignment? And I wanted to point out one thing that I've seen, particularly within the CPO, senior leadership within procurement and supply chain space. Really crude example, but we utilise a lot of behavioural profiling as part of our recruitment process. If we go back to 2018, typical CPO type profiles And this is McQuaid, by the way, not Insight, so it's slightly different. But effectively, what we would have seen, and I don't know if you can see my pointer moving on the screen at all, but the red line there is typically it's what we would call dominance. It's competitive, it's goal orientated, target focused individual. It's people that kind of have that very strategic, we're going to move forward type mentality. Then what we saw, certainly in procurement supply chain, were people that then favoured green, which was analytical. So very analytical, very data driven, followed by a lot of drive in the blue and a lot of independence in yellow. So drive means pressure orientated, like a lot of things going on, like a lot of variety. They get things done. People that like pressure and have a lot of drive handle that pressure well and get things done in organisations. And yellow is independence, very much strong-minded, persistent, creative problem solvers, don't want to be micromanaged. If we then fast forward to 2024, the biggest notable change is here in that green. We've gone below the line analytical and have very much moved into social. So senior leaders have to have that social ability. People who are social typically are very people orientated, so very good at looking at the needs of their teams. They're very good with suppliers. They've got that, tend to have good emotional intelligence, and are very good at senior stakeholder engagement. So very interesting, in the past 6 years, we've seen a real noticeable difference in terms of what boards are looking at from a behavioural perspective. If there's any questions on any of this, please throw it into the Q&A or the chat, and I'll try and get into them as we go along. I think it's interesting to know and to understand why it's difficult to find good leaders at the moment, and why it is challenging to find those individuals. As I said before, that pace of innovation and technology change is huge at the moment. So finding leaders that can manage that is really, really challenging. As I said before, that social, changing social demographics is huge. You know, the UK, for instance, high proportion of overseas employees within our organisations. As I said before, we've got a huge range of generations within our organisations at the moment. So when we start adding these factors in, there's this focus on agility. I mentioned before the Black Swan events that need us to be agile in our thinking and our ability to be able to lead organisations. There's huge pressure on financial performance. 20 years ago, when I started in recruitment, it was very much thought that finance directors were the obvious next seat to move into managing director roles. Now, as businesses have developed over the last 20 years, what we now see is functional heads moving there. So if your supply chain, which, by the way, as a industry and as a demographic, are far more educated and capable than they were 20 years ago because of the likes of SIPs and the educational processes people go through, we see those people moving into board level and C-suite positions, but they have to know and understand the sort of financial implications of what they're doing in businesses. We sit on the precipice of an aging workforce population and effectively a labour force deficit. In 2014, the Boston Consulting Group published a paper, and it was saying effectively that by 2030, every major economy globally, UK included, would be in a labour force deficit. So what that graph shows is in white, the labour force availability. So that labour force availability peaked at about 2020 and is generally starting to decline now. Why is that? Because post-baby boomer generation, we are having less children. I think actually a lot of those baby boomers are now starting to retire. We're seeing that. And actually, Brexit and the COVID pandemic sped those things up. We saw a lot of senior leaders decide they were going to go back to their host countries. They didn't want to be part of the UK anymore because of its plans, so they left and went back to their host countries. We saw a phenomenal amount of people during the COVID pandemic actually decide to take early retirement. They had enough money in the bank, they achieved a lot in their careers, and they just thought being part of the workforce at that time was just too much. So actually took early retirement. We've got fewer people joining the workforce. Two reasons. One, as I said, we're having less children than we did before. We've got more people going into further education. So whereas 10, 20 years ago, people were joining the workforce at 18, 19, that is now being delayed in a lot of cases to 21, 22, people taking gap years 23. So actually, that workforce that we had is being stretched as well. And we've got a lot of gaps that we're trying to fill in terms of stretching everybody's roles and responsibilities to cover those. But all of that effectively means we have got a leadership talent shortage in the UK at the moment, especially, and that we're seeing that replicated in other major European economies as well. Alicia and the team asked me whether I could just give a real top-line overview of what's happening in procurement search processes, because I think for a lot of people it's seen as this magical, mystical process that people go, oh, how do I get involved in that? And I don't really understand it. So to give you an idea, week 0, before we start a search, we're pitching to a client. Typically, clients will ask 2 to 3 consultancies to come in and pitch their capability and suitability for the search. Once that's step 1 and over the line and we've had terms signed, we're starting to work with clients in that space in terms of getting a really strong, robust briefing about the role. And typically what we're looking at there is what challenges, and again, if we use the Chief Procurement Officer title as an example, what challenges do they need to help the business to solve? Because there's CPOs and there's CPOs, right? So, but if we can find the ones that are really used to and have capability of solving those challenges, it's good for organizations. We do a lot around behavioral benchmarking. So looking at what behaviors are required in the role. So the skills, the experience, the results are really important, but so is finding people with the right behaviors, because a lot of people are hired based on their skills and their experiences, but behaviors will give you very often a much better predictor of future success. And the other thing that we're doing with clients is we're looking at their EVP, their employer's value proposition. So typically we use the mnemonic MV squared. What is the mission of the organization? What's the vision? Where does it want to be in five? I think it's very difficult to say where companies want to be in 10 years' time these days because everything that's going on. But what is the vision for the business? What are the milestones that somebody needs to complete to help achieve that vision for the organization? And what are the values? Values are really important for people wanting to join organizations, because again, we've seen a real development in people choosing values over remuneration, as an example. You know, people want to purposeful work, and especially, dare I say, as we start to come down that generational ladder, those people entering the workforce are definitely values and purpose driven. We do a lot of market mapping and headhunting. So we are doing a lot of work to try and work out direct and indirect talent sources for organizations, bring them to the table, entice them into processes using this employer's value proposition and bring them in. So typically that process would take up to about 8 weeks. We then be working with those candidates that have been longlisted to do competency and behavioural evaluations that we would then present as part of our shortlist. Typically, that's a sort of 2-week period up to about 10 weeks. We then have interviews with clients that, again, typically would take sort of 2 weeks. One word that I would note on that, there has been a distinct, and when you look at all the data from the REC, the recruitment body, typically we've seen a 25 to 35% increase in the stages in interview processes. Now, what's driving that? I think there's a lot of shared responsibility. People don't necessarily want to make a challenge because when they're hiring at the moment, they're under a lot of pressure to get it right, and they want to spread that responsibility. And they want to make sure they've got the right person. So they're adding parts of the process in. Oh, I now need you to meet so-and-so. Want you to meet so-and-so. My watchword or my word of advice on that is, ultimately, if you put somebody in front of enough people, someone will find a reason not to hire them. So, and the other watch or thing to consider in that is, are you always creating the best view for the person in the process? What was going to be a 2 or 3 parts has suddenly become 4 or 5. They're starting to think, can these guys actually make a decision? So, and then what we find is we would have a notice period. So I think there is this almost fallacy that it takes 6 months to hire somebody. It doesn't. Typically, you're looking 10 to 12 weeks to hire somebody. The thing that takes the long time is people at this level normally need to give between 3 to 6 months notice. So that's the piece that is, I suppose, a bit of a myth within executive search. The process doesn't take that long. The notice period will be the piece that takes long. I thought you guys might find this interesting as well. We did some research at the beginning of this year, and we looked at where 229 respondees, senior level, that had found a role in the previous 12 months. And this is the data that came back. So 38% of them found their roles through executive search consultancies. 35% found their role through their own network. Your network is a really powerful tool in your job search. So utilizing that when you're starting to think about, well, where does my CPO role come from? Using some trusted people within your network to start gaining advice can often lead to a lot of opportunities. Where we saw the biggest increase actually was approaches from companies at 13%. That went from somewhere like 6% to 13% against the prior year. And interestingly, only 14% found their role from making a direct application. I think part of the challenge with that is companies have made it so easy to make applications now. The volume becomes so high that actually it's very hard for people to process all of the applications. And I'll come on to one of the other fallacies in a minute. The executive search piece, at the risk of sounding like I'm feathering my own nest, the reason why that is still so high predominantly is because when companies are hiring people at a senior level, it might be sensitive. It might be sensitive for the reason of they don't want to let their suppliers know or the wider world know that they're hiring. It might be that they're replacing somebody internally and it's not widely known. It could be that they just don't want that out in the wider market. So that's why there's still such a high level of recruitment done at this level that you won't necessarily see as advertised roles out there. So again, if you are looking at that next jump to CPO or senior level C-suite member, having a couple of executive search consultants in your pocket that you work with, that you know, that you trust, is a useful exercise as part of your job search.
Close up quite quickly. Time's running out.
Apologies. I think a lot of this David covered off, and I'll just throw these up really, really quickly. But effectively, these are the 5 things that we're seeing that boards are looking for in CPOs at the moment. So that's strategic vision, digital fluency, so around AI and technology, big piece around relationship building, ethical leadership, and ability to manage change, with the top 5 topics that people wanted to see. I won't address all of these, but I did want to just address this. We hear all the time, all of our CVs are being read by AI. We did some research a month ago. Only 16% of companies are actually using AI to read and screen CVs. when we pushed those companies to have further conversations, what was interesting is they weren't actually using AI, they were using automation. So they were automating the process, but there was still human intervention in it. So please don't think you have to have this CV that talks really heavily about, that is AI orientated, because actually, more often than not, there's a human. So I'll leave that there. We've run out of time, but if anybody wants to connect and discuss any of the points in there, I'm happy to have a conversation.
Thank you, Craig. Really good points raised there. I think getting a snapshot of the executive recruitment market is very, very important for the ones who look into crossover. We've literally got a few minutes. I had, I think I had two questions which I wanted to dive back to David and Susan. So one question is how can the board ensure when you're cleansing data, how can you ensure you present to the board while cleansing data and standardizing enterprise KPIs for each meeting? What's your advice on that?
Well, I think I'll let Susan go first. I think it's
Yeah,
probably the
Susan,
fairest
yes.
thing to do.
So it's about routine, isn't it, and habit, and creating new routines and habits. And I think that there's a cultural piece in this as well, a change management piece, where we need to make it part of our habit and routine that this is what we need to do. Just like you clean your house once a week or however often, some people every day. Make it part of your routine, and then it doesn't become a chore. People are not intimidated by it because they're used to seeing the format, the numbers, etc. And it's more to do with that, I would say, than anything else.
Thank you, Susan.
I think the
I
one thing I
think,
would add, Annalicia, as well is to say that giving ownership to the data to certain people within the organization. So let's say take a typical category, be it IT or marketing or whatever, and say you own that data. You need to make sure, in collaboration with whoever you're working with in the data team or whatever else, that data is good, because we're depending on that data being accurate. So that ownership piece, for me, from a leadership point of view, is a really critical key component. But also it means then that you drive this structured collaboration then between different people across the teams to actually make sure that what you've got is good, sound stuff.
That's great, and I would agree with that, but don't just give it to one person, because if they do leave, all that knowledge goes. So try and like share it amongst a couple of people. Just as I'm always like backup plans, backup plans.
contingency. That's my favorite word. So one more question before we kind of close off. Of course, people are eyeing CEO roles. What we've mentioned a few experiences, competencies, etc. What are three? I think probably David and Craig. What are three most prioritized ones to make the transition credible to the board? Top three.
Well, three, crikey, Craig. I don't know. Um, I think one of the things that both Craig and I pulled out is this sort of shift in terms of being more emotionally intelligent as opposed to just pure, I'll call it, technically intelligent, and that has been borne out many times over. But I think what people are also looking for is the ability for people to be, more authentic and engaged in what they do, and take ownership of what is happening at an organizational level. Certainly for a leader, that ownership piece is quite important. I think Craig pulled up sort of five key attributes. And again, I think depending on the organization, I'd almost sort of say that order could probably actually shift in terms of priority, I would say. And so therefore, there isn't an absolute answer, but I think depending upon which organization, which sector, etc., be that sort of, how can I put it, major sort of thoughts around risk, because you're in shipping, and guess what, there's a lot happening in that space at the moment. You might say that risk then suddenly shifts to the top of the list. So I think depending on the sector, and depending on the organization itself, that list will change. But I would say that selection of those five criteria that Craig pulled out, as well as this sort of, this whole piece around behaviors and emotions, I would say absolutely that needs to be in there somewhere. Craig, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would echo that, David. I think for me, that emotional intelligence, that people orientation is the most critical at the moment, because ultimately, if you can't manage, develop, coach teams to become better, then you've got no organization. The organization's not going to grow and to develop. So for me, that would be absolutely the number one. And as David rightly pointed out, depending on who else sits on the board, depending on where other strengths and capabilities lie within the rest of the board, you will have to have slightly different strengths to complement the rest of the board.
Can I add just a little throwball comment in there? This is something that I kind of say to anybody in any role doing anything, but visibility. So you might have all those skills, but if nobody knows who you are within the organization, they're never going to get picked up. So I always say be memorable for something. So for me, I've got 3D Susan, sparkly background, have an interesting hobby that someone knows about, wear funky ties or socks, or be memorable for something that makes you stand out amongst everybody else. And it doesn't even have to be like business related, but you'll be related to the business through that memorable thing.
Thank you so much. I mean, great answers. Thank you so much. Really, really valuable. I'm listening and I'm like, I need to apply for a role. A CEO. Thank you guys
You
so
are
much.
a CEO.
Yeah, I am now. Yeah. Big job. And thank you everyone so much for joining in. I just wanted to just quickly run through a few things. I know we're running over, so I'm just going to take 2 minutes and just run through. So our platform, the Procurement Plug, which would be our ecosystem and introducing all the things I've mentioned earlier, we will be launching in a short month and a half. So we are looking at finally a second week in September to launch all those amazing things. Next year, I think all the things we're talking about, executive development, coaching, and having a space to grow, we are working at the Procurement Plug on our exec plug. Now, that is a membership platform where we will be delivering monthly peer roundtables with SME expert. We're talking behavioral scientists, social and sort of like communication coaches, financial workshops, all the things that you need to grow. We are working with partnering with SMEs to sort of bringing roundtables and workshops to help you to grow and all the behaviors that you need. So we're launching that between Q2 and Q3 next year, but it's all in work planning. So as part of this today, we will share a little bit more around the sort of registration for it once we start opening up that registration. So the exec plug, of course, like I mentioned, we'll be integrating it as part of the procurement plug, but the executive arm of it. What makes it really special is that it's not just coming to sit down and listen to people. We also have our proprietary tools that we will be working with in the exec plug that you would have access to benchmark your leadership, benchmark your growth, but also we have a proprietary tool that will help you to learn from other peers. So peer facilitating, mentoring and shadowing, etc. Um, so next slide. So again, just to sort of talk about another thing that we're working on, again, the PTX, which is our Project and Talent Exchange SaaS platform. So it will be connecting high potential leaders to strategic short-term assignments. And what this does, it helps you to improve your skills, your knowledge of different sectors, and broaden your commercial knowledge, your commercial experience, and also broaden your network as well. So it's a tool to help you build your skills, but also support in that sort of cross industry networking. It's going to be out for pilot in November. We're looking at bringing out for pilot. So again, I will share more information on that in terms of registration for opening for pilot. The tool is quite more than that, but in terms of the exec side of thing, that will be part of what we will be looking at it for it to do. And of course, we've got Elevate 2025 in Glasgow. It's our second track of our event series this year, and it's our second part of our two-part inaugural series. We had Manchester, which was amazing, and you will meet the classification guru in person there. And then you also have David there as well, where you will get even more about the little things that we touched on today. You will get you get even more about it and how to and where and things like that. So that's on August the 26th in Glasgow. And you would, of course, see we've been blasting about it on LinkedIn. So if you're interested in learning more and being part of a more sort of intimate workshop where you will get and more deeper knowledge, definitely endeavor to be part of that. And I mentioned as well our concierge service is your on-demand procurement office. We working with developing a pool of experts that we have, and we will be not just looking at experts, but quality assurance experts that will look at the task before it's passed back onto the client. So we're making sure for people like David who are expert CPOs that in that sort of experience level that will quality assure all the work before we pass it from our concierge back to our clients. So it will be based all on a credit system. You will have a MSA that allows the procurement plug to mobilize experts within 24 hours to get your task done. So it's not FTE, it's not a full-time contractor. It's based on, right, we need a market scan, we need a short list of 15, 20 suppliers who could do the best, who could provide the best software for HR or whatever it may be. Give us a task and we turn around that within 5 working days. We have medium task as well and high task. It'll take a little bit longer SLA. However, the procurement concierge is all part of our ecosystem to help functions increase and without increasing headcount. Without further ado, I'll let you know our mission. Our vision is to be the #1 ecosystem for procurement, career growth, and industry transformation. That's my big ambitious plan. So anything you think about procurement, I want everyone to say, "Oh, have you checked the procurement plug for that?" So that's the plan, and that's the things I'm working towards. And our mission is, of course, empowering procurement professionals through learning and development, career growth support, providing the things, not just telling you what you need to do, but showing you and guiding you through that growth. We provide the tools and resources for you to do that, and the community and the network for you to do that. So thank you so much for being part of our webinar today. It's our second webinar, and thank you to Susan, thank you to David, and thank you to Craig. Much appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you now others as well. Thank you guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
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 Bye.